We continue now at the top of Daf Pedalid and Beis and Meseches Pesachim. This is Pesachim Daf 84b. The Gemara in the previous summit had a machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe. According to the Tanna Kama, if you have a pasul carbon Pesach, then there's no prohibition of v'yetzim lo sishbaru bo, no prohibition to break the bones. And according to Rebbe, it's not that it's pasul, but according to Rebbe, it's if you have a carbon Pesach that can't be eaten, then there's no prohibition of v'yetzim lo sishbaru bo. So the question is, what's the difference between those two positions? They seem very similar. Rabbi Yirmiyah says the difference is if you have a carbon Pesach that's ba b'tumah. Let's say most of the congregation is tameh, so now even though the carbon Pesach is pasul, so to speak, it's tameh, but it's still eaten, it's still roy la'achila. So that's what the Gemara says. High pasul, according to the Tanna Kama, this is pasul, and therefore there's no prohibition. But leman dama roy la'achila, but according to Rebbe, who says that the issue is whether it's fit to be eaten or not, hainami roy la'achila, who this is considered roy la'achila, and therefore the prohibition does in fact apply. So according to this, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rebbe is actually stricter than the Tanna Kama. So Rav Yosef says, Ki agavna tekuli alba ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. No, that's incorrect. In the case that you gave, where the carbon Pesach that's ba b'tumah, everyone would be lenient. Everyone would agree there's no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. De Rebbe la kulei ka'asi, because Rebbe is only coming to be more lenient than the Tanna Kama. V'haya pasalu, Rebbe would certainly agree that if it's ba b'tumah, it's pasul, and there's no prohibition. Rebbe's coming to say a leniency. The real difference between them is, let's say you had a carbon Pesach that was kosher for a period of time, and then it became pasul. That's the machlokas. Laman damar kosher hakosheru. According to the one who says it depends if it's kosher, this was, as Rashi says, this was nasu avodosa behechsher. This was done behechsher. Later it became pasul, so the prohibition applies. Laman damar royal achila. But according to Rebbe, who says the issue has to be whether it's royal achila or not, hahashta lav royal achilu. In this case, right now, it's not royal achila. So if it's not royal achila, the prohibition does not apply. Abaye says, Kuli alma, kol ki agavna, ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. Abaye says, no, even in that case, in a situation where it was kosher and then it became pasul, everyone agrees there's no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. My time, what's the reason? Hashta miyos ha'pasul, because right now is pasul. That's all we care about. The machlokas between them is, let's say it's not the time of achila. Let's say it's before, it's miba'od yom, it's still daytime, it's still the time before you're supposed to be eating the carbon Pesach. So is there a prohibition or not at that time? Laman damar kosher, hakosher, according to the man damar who says the criteria is whether it's kosher in this case as well, the prohibition applies. Laman damar roy la'achila, according to the one who says it has to be fit to be eaten, hashta la bar achilu. Right now, at the moment, it's miba'od yom, it's not the time for eating the carbon Pesach. Meisvei, we ask the following question. Rebbe says, Nimnin al moach shebarosh ve'in nimnin al moach shebakulis. You're allowed to appoint people over the marrow that's in the head, but you're not allowed to appoint people over the marrow that's in the kulis, that's in the thigh. So al moach shebarosh my time. So why is Rebbe saying the moach shebarosh is okay? Because when it comes to the marrow that's in the head, so it's actually possible to scrape it out, to get it out without breaking the bone. But when it comes to in the kulis, when it comes to the marrow that's in the thigh, you'd have to break the bones. There's a prohibition. So the Gemara now asks, if you're going to tell me that you're allowed to break the bones while it's still daytime, so kulis nami nitzbrei mi ba'od yom. So very simple. I have a simple solution: break the kulis while it's still daytime. V'nafkua lamoach didei. Take out the marrow, then you can have people register for that marrow. So clearly, that is not the case. So Amar lach Abaye, so Abaye responds to you, I can answer that brisa. V'letaimech, according to your reasoning, mishachashecha, let's go from when it's dark also. Nami, also in that case, naisu gumrasa, bring some coals, v'nechas alev v'nikla, v'nafka lamachdida, you can use that to burn it, and that's a way to get out the marrow. V'nimni alev, then the people can register on the marrow. There's always a solution. Ta'tanya, because we learned in a brisa, v'lasorif ba'atzamos, that if you burn the bones, v'amachatech begidin, or you're cutting the gidin, you're cutting the sinews, ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem, those don't count as shviras ha'etzem. So clearly there's a way around it, so why don't we use that? Elamayis loch lemeimar, so what are you going to say? What's the response? Why we don't allow that as a solution in this particular case? Abaye omer mishum paka, Rav omer mishum hefsid kachim, to come mafsid lebi yadayim. Dil machil nura mi moach didei. So Abaye says the concern is the reason we don't use a fire is because we're afraid it's going to burst. That's mishum paka. So if it does burst, that would actually be considered breaking the bones. It's prohibition. So we say we don't want to use that as a solution. And Rava has a similar idea. Rava says the reason why we don't want to use a fire is because we're afraid of hefsid kachim. Sometimes the fire is going to go and it's actually going to burn the moach itself. It's going to burn the marrow itself. You're going to be destroying edible kachim, which is not allowed. So just like we have an answer for why fire is not a solution, mibod yom nami. So when it comes to you're asking why don't we just break the thigh bone mibod yom, that also we have a gezeira, we have a decree mibod yom atu mishachashecha. We don't want you to go breaking the bone while it's still daytime. We're afraid you're going to end up doing that after dark as well. So it's just simply a gezeira. So don't ask. Abaye says don't ask on me from that brisa. Rav Papa says, Kol ki agavnu kuli alma yesh bo mishum shviras etzem. He says, all the case that you're giving me, that case before mibod yom, there certainly is an issue, a prohibition of shviras etzem. My time, what's the reason? Lo ursa mechsi la'achila, because the fact of the matter is, when night comes, it's going to be edible. Ella be'ever sheyatza miksaso kamifli. The real machlokus between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe is, let's say you have a situation where a limb, part of the limb leaves the area where it's leaves the area of Yerushalayim, leaves the area where you're supposed to eat it, so it becomes pasul biyotze. So mandam are kosher, the one who says that it has to be a kosher carbon pesach, ha kosheru, this is a kosher carbon pesach. Umandam are roy la'achila, now the one who says it has to be roy la'achila, hai lav bar achilahu. In this particular case, it's not considered bar achila. Rashi over here explains. Aver sheyatza miksaso chutz lechomas Yerushalayim. Again, part of a limb of the carbon pesach leaves the wall of Yerushalayim. So now the issue is you're going to need to cut off that part which left Yerushalayim. So hai nami kosher, share hapnimi kosher. The inner part, the part that didn't leave Yerushalayim, is kosher. Vareu shovro. Now you're breaking it in order to break off this limb. V'yover mishum lo sishbrubo, and that's going to be a transgression. Ella, rather, instead the solution is you cut until you get to the bone. You don't want to actually break the bone. Then you peel it away till you get to where the joint, where the bones connect. You cut in that area to avoid the prohibition. We're going to say that in the Mishnah later on Daf Pehei Amud Beis. So again, that's according to the one who says you're not allowed to cut the bone. If it's kosher, this is kosher. But hayla barachilu. But the other one will say no, it's not a problem because it's not barachilu, meaning b'makom shvira eino roy la'achila. In the area you're breaking it, that area is not roy la'achila. Aval aver sheyatza kulo. Now, if you would have a situation where the entire aver leaves the mechitza, leaves Yerushalayim, Rashi says, dahainu haisa lo shasa kosher v'nifsal. That would be a situation where it was kosher and then became puzzle to kuli alma ein bo mishum shvira. That would for sure not be a prohibited shvira sa'etzem dahashtami a puzzle, because that's called puzzle. In other words, when part of the aver leaves, the aver itself is still kosher. There's just an issue of that little part of it which left. That's going to have to be cut away. So that's a question. On the one hand, it's called kosher. On the other hand, it's lav barachila. That's going to be the machlokus. Again, this is the position of Rav Papa. That's actually the machlokus between Rebbe and the Tanna Kama. And the Gemara says, Kidatanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, says, Aver sheyatza miksaso v'shavru. Let's say part of an aver left, again, Yerushalayim, you broke it. Ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. There's no problem of shviras ha'etzem. That's going to follow the position of Rebbe. Rav Sheshes Breder Avidi, Rav Sheshes Breder Avidi says, Kol ki agavn, if you have a situation like that, the kuli alma ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. That's for sure not going to be a problem of shviras ha'etzem. Dahai aver ha'paselu. That's called, that limb is called pasel. That even that part of the limb that left Yerushalayim is pasel. The machlokas is, what if you have a situation of a shviras ha'etzem, of breaking the bone in a situation of na? Again, na was a situation where it was not fully roasted, where it is still raw. So if the meat is raw, is that going to be a prohibition of shviras ha'etzem? Mandam or kosher or kosheru? The one who says kosher, this is still considered a kosher carbon pesach. Mandam or roy la'achila, the one who says it has to be fit for eating, hashtain roy la'achila. Right now, while it's raw, it's not roy la'achila. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Kol ki agavna no, if you have a situation like that, like no, yesh bo mishum shviras ha'etzem, that certainly would have a prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. My time, and what's the reason? Doch chazi la'achila, because it's fit for eating. The matvila, you're just going to roast it, v'yochele, and then he'll be able to eat it. El shviras ha'al yo'ika beinayu. The real machlokus between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe is, what about breaking the bone in the area of the tail? Lamandam or kosher, according to the one who says kosher, this is kosher. Lamandam or roy la'achila, hayeno roy la'achila. According to the one who says it has to be fit for eating, this particular bone, this particular area of the animal is not roy la'achila da'alya legavoa salka, because the tail actually is burned on the mizbeach, it goes legavoa. Rav Ashi says, when it comes to the aliyah, certainly there's no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. It's certainly not roy la'achila at all. The real machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe is a situation where you have a limb and there's not even a kazayas of meat on that limb. Laman damar kosher, a kosher, according to the one who says that the criteria it has to be kosher, this is considered kosher. Laman damar roy la'achila, the one who says it has to be fit for eating. Bo'inon shir achila v'leka, it needs to be the amount that's considered eating. If it's less than a kazayas, it's not the proper shir. Ravina says, no, certainly in such a situation, everybody would agree. If it doesn't have a kazayas, there's no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. Everybody agrees you need the shir achila. The real machlokas is you have a limb where you don't have a kazayas basar in this particular area, but there is a kazayas basar somewhere else in this animal. Lamandam or kosher, according to the one who says kosher, this is going to be kosher. Lamandam or roy la'achila, according to the one who says roy la'achila, bo'inon shir achila b'makam shvira. The amount, the shir achila, the kazayas of food, of meat, needs to be in the area where you're actually breaking the bone. If it's not in the area where you're breaking the bone, that does not count for haleka. You don't have that in this case. Gemara says, Tanya karba minayu. So we just had a whole bunch of Amoraim who gave different opinions on what Rebbe exactly was saying. And the Gemara says we have a brisa that follows 4 of the Amoraim. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Rebbe says, Bebayis echad yeyochel v'yetzem lo sishberubo. That's the pasuk. Again, you cannot break the bones of the Karban Pesach. Ala kosher uchayev, eino chayev ala apostle. You're only chayev on a kosher animal, not an apostle animal. Haisalo shasa kosher, v'nifsal b'shasa achila. So let's say it was kosher, but then it became apostle at the time of eating it. Ein bo mishum shviras etzem. There is no prohibition. Yesh bo shir achila. Let's say there's a situation where it has the shir achila, then yesh bo mishum shviras etzem. Then it's considered there's a prohibition of shviras etzem. However, ein bo shir achila, if it's not a kazayas, so ein bo mishum shviras etzem. Then there's no shviras etzem. Haroy la mizbeach. Ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. If it's part of the animal that goes to the mizbeach, there's no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. B'shas achilo yesh bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. At the time when you're supposed to eat it, that's when there's a prohibition. Shalo b'shas achilo. If it's not the time of eating the Karban Pesach, ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. There is no prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. Itmar, it was learned, Aver she'ein alav kazayis basar b'makom zeh, v'yesh alav kazayis basar b'makom acher. Again, the case we just had before, you have a limb where there's no kazayis in this particular spot, but there's a kazayis of basar in another area. Rabbi Yochanan says, Yesh bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. There is a prohibition of shviras ha'etzem. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says there is no prohibition. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish the following question. It says, V'etzem lo sishbero bo. It says you can't break the bones. Echad etzem sheyesh alav kazayis basar. Doesn't matter if it has a kazayis basar on it. V'echad etzem she'ein alav kazayis basar. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have a kazayis basar. There's still a prohibition. So what exactly does this brisa mean? My ein alav kazayis basar. What does it mean it doesn't have a kazayis of meat? Ilema dein alav kazayis basar klal. If the brisa means it has no meat at all, why should there be a prohibition of shviras etzem? Of course there's no prohibition if there's no shir kazayis basar. Elalav, rather is it not? Here's what the brisa means. Echad etzem sheyesh alav kazayis basar b'makom zeh, ve'echad she'ein alav kazayis basar b'makom zeh, ve'yesh alav kazayis basar b'makom acher. It means to say it doesn't matter if it has a kazayis in this particular place. It doesn't matter if it does not have a kazayis in this place, but it has somewhere else. There still is going to be a prohibition. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan asks Reish Lakish. It seems like there is. Yesh bo misham shviras ha'etzem. Kasha Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. It seems like a kasha against Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Amar lei says back to him, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Aleph.